originally was related to the dancer and the person who does complicated fencing. But when you get the machine gun and all that, the warriors are finished. And Robert Moore would say, now, men are hardwired with this. This is not software. And he said, you think you're going to get rid of the warrior and the man, you're wrong. And that's a mistake that the English socialists made before the Second World War. Men are hardwired there.
What I'm hearing is what you hear everywhere now, that the distrust of men and of the masculine energy is pervasive. And that that's connected with a certain amount of brutality that has gone on, especially the last 100 years or 200 years, when war has become a mass destruction, and when it has become simple for someone without the training, without the discipline of the spirit, and without the depth of soul to can instantaneously annihilate many other people. With that fear, there's become a tremendous fear of the masculine in general.
Is that, you mean that there isn't enough discipline in the way we look at the warrior? Or is it destructiveness that comes in?
That it becomes simply brutality. And that it doesn't involve in the way of the old tribal cultures where, for instance, amongst the Irish, they would say, you don't give a man weapons until you've taught him how to dance. You don't teach a man the skills of war until you've taught him the skills of poetry, the skills of the soul. A man that can't say a poem shouldn't be armed at all. Men without ferocity don't feel right. As a matter of fact, most women like fierceness in a man. Women desire, I believe, to see a man that's moving in his life with some purpose. And by purpose, I mean something that's deep and meaningful and valuable to the whole community. That's what women want from men, I believe. That's what men want. Men want the similar thing for women. That men want to be with a woman who is moving with purpose in her life, too. The trouble is when that kind of movement starts, it's scary because there's power involved in it, often fierceness. So the old way was to connect that with beauty. So what I would say is if men are moving around only with weapons and they're not dancing and they're not making music and they're not dealing with images of great beauty, then I won't trust them either.
In the workshop, you have an opportunity to hear the ancient men's mythology. It's very strange thinking about it. It's as if men need mythology. I think more than women. There's something in men's imagination that's extremely flamboyant. It fires up and like kindling. And looking at your neighbors and your family is not sufficient to kindle that. So in Turkey to this day, for example, storytellers will come in with a funny-looking little instrument, and there will be 100 men sitting in there with their mouths open. This will go on 4 or 5 hours. They've all heard the story before. So what? So the image then of certain wild, reckless, shall we say, active men, not only active in doing the story, but it's about active men. And a lot of grief in those stories. And something that can't be really overlooked the more you experience it. You're experiencing the same stories your ancestors experienced. When Michael, who's Irish American, starts to do this, it's obvious he's in connection with Irishmen 1,000 years ago, 2,000, 10,000 years ago. And so that resonance there inside the male line begins to develop. And you lose some of the grief around your father because he's only one of enormous numbers of them. Go back.
If you watch the word mythology, words have histories. And at one point, myth meant truth or true knowledge, mythologos. the logos, the logic of truth, would be something like the word, what it meant a long time ago. Myth now, in common usage now, means a falsity. So the word has gone all the way from meaning truth to meaning what's false. People say, oh, that's just a myth. And so that's what's happened to mythology. And especially over the last, say 700 years, there has been a collapse of the mythological perception of the world. You could say there is no longer a shared perception of a mythos. In other words, there is not a spiritual, psyche-bound, shared way of viewing the world. And when that happens, a whole series of bonds amongst people break. With the loss of a shared mythology, you lose shared ritual. When shared rituals are lost, unfortunately, what happens is people are no longer bonded to each other. One of the old descriptions of mythology is the glue of the world. It's the imagistic glue that holds the world together. And when it's no longer a shared experience, then people become more separate from each other.
I've got a story. Want a story?
Give us a story.
With his father and the
I'm
son.
sick of this talk. Give us a
and all that
story.
stuff. Yeah, about the time for a story. Okay. It's an African story from the Lupe people. It's an old story. You know what they say? They say, once upon a time. Nobody knows what that means. Upon a time. But it has something to do with once, before time was digital. Before time was caught and strapped onto people's wrists.
That's right.
Before time was captured and put on the steeple of all the churches, up in the highest point of all the villages, so that time dominated all the things going on below. Before time was singular, when there was a masculine time and a feminine time and a pregnant woman's time and an old man's time and a time for a little boy to walk around looking at the ocean, when time was a thing that you felt inside yourself and didn't have to keep checking the radio for. Once, in that time, there was a father, and he had a son. And the father said to the son, listen, if you should ever lay down next to a maiden, when you do that, if you do that, you will die. And so the father had that son raised in the bush, kept away from people, raised there by himself. And it went on that way until the boy was growing into a youth. And one day, a maiden came to that area of the bush, and she saw that youth, and she said, you know, this is lonely, you living here like this. I think I should come and visit you every day. And the youth said, oh yes, I think this is a good idea, even though my father said if I should ever lay down with a maiden, when I do that, I would die, just as if a knife had gone into my heart. And the maiden said, well, if that's the case, then I won't come at all, ever. For I do not wish to harm you, and I certainly do not wish to kill you. But the youth said, oh, please do come. Come tomorrow. Please come. So the maiden said, okay, that's the way it is. I will come. And if you die, well, maybe you won't die altogether. And maybe I can bring you back into life. So the next day, the maiden came. After a time, the maiden and the youth, well, they lay down together. You know what happened? Do you know what happened? It was just as the father had said. When they laid down, the youth died. The youth was brought to the village. The father and the mother of that youth saw what happened, and they began to cry. They mourned and they wept. But the maiden herself, she went into the bush, deep into the bush, where the old man of the bush was, where the old hunter was. And she went to him and she said, here's what happened. It went like this and it happened like that, and the result of it is that the youth is dead. The old man in the bush said, listen, this is no problem. All we need is a fire and a lizard. And so he arranged for logs to be brought, to be piled in the village high. He arranged for them to be set on fire.